now in year number 4. It's a Yank on the Footy with Craig Wessels. Let's all sit back and enjoy a chat about the greatest game on the face of the earth. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 243 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels, coming from Sandusky, Ohio, and spring is right around the corner here. Unfortunately, we live on a really long block because winter is still hanging on. This is my second episode in my series on why I truly believe American NFL fans would love the AFL. And in a moment, I am going to be joined by Rick Shaibani. Rick is an American footy fan. He plays for the LA Dragons in the USAFL. He's an avid NFL fan, and quite frankly, he is a huge friend of the podcast. If you've listened to the podcast for a long time, I have mentioned Rick in the past. I've had him on a couple times, but he was actually the first person that I reached out to, and I didn't know who he was at the time, on Twitter when I was coming up with this idea of doing the footy podcast, and he didn't tell me that I was crazy for doing that. It took him a while before he came to that conclusion. So we're going to be jumping into talking about why NFL fans would probably love this game if they spend a little bit of time checking it out and figuring out how it works. So before we dive in, though, the club of the episode, and I do this for every episode for those of you who may be new to the show, I give a shout out to a local footy club. Sometimes they're here in the U.S., more often than not, they are in Australia, though. But today's club of the episode are the Caroline Springs Lakers. And, there's a reason why I'm doing this one, because Rick actually went and spent a year playing for Caroline Springs in Victoria before COVID broke out. The club was conceived back in 2002 when the community began working to see if there'd be interest in having a club in the community. And they had an overwhelming response from what I've read, and we're here today. They've got 12 teams from under 9 all the way up through seniors on both the men's and women's sides, while also running an Auskick program. And the senior women's side, they open up their 2023 fixture on the 15th of April, facing off against the VU Western Spurs. And they are members of the Western Region Football League in Victoria, and they play their games at the Town Center Oval in Caroline Springs. And Lakers, I want to wish you the absolute best this year in 2023. Now, before we dive into that, though, I did want to take one other quick moment here and reflect back on one of the teams that I gave a shout out to in a previous episode, and that being the Tracy Village Razorbacks from the Northern Territories. And I featured them back in episode 223, which seems like a long time ago because that's 20 episodes ago. But if you've been following, I've put out 17 preview episodes for the 18 clubs so far in the last couple of weeks, so that hasn't been that long of a period of time. It was early February that I did that. But like I said, I featured them in episode 223 after I had seen a social media post about one of their 12 and under players, Anthony, who had suffered a very serious arm and wrist injury back in early February, and it looked like he was being an absolute trooper about it. Now, while Anthony is recovering from that injury, his teammates have picked up the slack with his absence and have continued their quest towards a premiership. And this past Monday, they had a huge second half in their game to find themselves now playing in the grand final this weekend after coming up from the number 4 position on the ladder. So Razorbacks, go out and get that premiership. I can't wait to see you guys singing your club song after hoisting that trophy. Best of luck to you, everybody. So let's go ahead and jump into my chat with Rick Shaibani as we talk about why NFL fans would love the AFL if they gave it a shot. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back to talk to people about the NFL and why NFL fans would love the AFL if they were to check it out. And I am joined by a guest who is no stranger to the podcast. He's been on a couple of different times. He is a member of the LA Dragons of the USAFL. He also spent a year playing in Australia with the Caroline Springs Lakers, who have some great questions that they wrote for that episode. I am thrilled to welcome Rick Shaibani back to the podcast. Rick, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Craig. It's good to be back. It's been a while, but we've got a new footy season coming up, of course, both in the AFL, of course, and stateside. So plenty to talk about, and gridiron,
Yes,
as the Aussies would say, the only other country that calls it soccer. And I mean, I guess Americans sometimes call it gridiron, but football, gridiron, American football.
Yep.
My dad still calls it American football as a Brit, which I still find amusing. He's been in the States for 30 years, and I'm like, Dad, come on.
Well, but that's what he was raised with. That's what he knows. I mean, it's gonna, and I think even an Australian expat that lives here in the U.S. for 30 years would probably still be calling it gridiron or American football. At that point in time, and probably still calling soccer because if they're already calling it that there with the Socceroos and such. Yeah. So, we're going to talk about the NFL a little bit. We're going to talk about the AFL as well here because my thesis, if you will, is that if NFL fans discovered Australian football, if they have not done so yet, that if they gave it a fair shake and they really looked at it a little bit, they would probably fall in love with it. Am I batshit crazy with that thought?
Oh, not in the slightest. It's funny to think about because, I know, during COVID when so many sports were shut down except footy, and we had that one little golden time period of where footy was out in the open and exposed for the whole world to see, essentially. And yeah, it's funny to think about because I mean, I'd love to see more gaps being bridged. I had a handful of friends in Australia who were interested in gridiron or watched it occasionally, and watching the Super Bowl on a Monday morning in blazing hot Melbourne weather was a fun experience. But no, yeah, there's a surprising amount of an appetite. I mean, I know there's always a lot of old school footy fans who are a bit purist and they think gridiron's a little too slow paced, and compared to footy, it is. But
I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah. Yeah,
but I do think your thesis is pretty accurate because most Americans that I show footy to think it's crazy, and they wonder. How do more people not know about this? And I think there's definitely an appetite there. And, the fact that there is, these nice little communities of expats in America who, I have plenty of Aussie friends out here historically, maybe not this past year because the Rams sucked, but they've had tickets in the past or they've gone to USC games. And when Aussies move over here and kind of immerse themselves in the Yank sporting culture, it's hard to avoid American football, right?
I hate to bring it up, but there is an entirely second NFL team in Los Angeles right now.
There most definitely is.
Yes, yes. Which I'm still a little chafed about that. I am a Browns fan, but the first NFL game I went to was a San Diego Chargers Kansas City Chiefs game in 1970, and I instantly became a fan of. He just passed away about a month ago. Their quarterback John Hadle, who looked anything but like a quarterback. He was a little pudgy, bald guy, but he threw 4 touchdowns that day. They won 37-13. Yeah, I remember that. And actually got to stay for the entire game, if I'm not mistaken, because my grandfather was driving rather than my dad. So that was a nice change of pace there, because I never got to stay for an entire game of anything with my dad because got to beat the traffic out of the parking lot.
It's a nightmare. It's funny because Qualcomm Stadium, the old one where the Chargers played before they moved to LA, was they knocked it down a couple years ago and rebuilt a new one strictly for San Diego State football, of course. But it's kind of in the middle of everything in San Diego, and the game day experience there is pretty cool. Yeah. Speaking of college football, I actually do tend to follow college gridiron more than the NFL these days, and that's another great connection with the Aussies, because it's hard to find someone who doesn't know that there are Aussies who can kick pretty far, and they can casually incorporate a bit of footy technique into the punting. So that's always fun to see.
Absolutely, yeah. Because now are you a Rams fan since you live in Los Angeles? Then
I am not. So growing up in Virginia and having a mom from more or less the DC area. I actually grew up with, Redskins, Commanders, whoever you want to call them, but definitely an organization that can't seem to stop tripping over its own feet. But we've had some fleeting success occasionally. It's just we like many other NFL franchises have awful ownership, so it's definitely a frustrating experience. But I mean, my mom grew up in like the glory days when they won the Super Bowls under Gibbs, and of course, again tying it back to the Aussies, we were one of the clubs that gave Sav Rocca a chance to bridge the gap between footy and gridiron, because of course he was a Collingwood legend who was inescapable in the 90s, and of course his brother played too, and they both tried the NFL, but Sav was a bit more successful, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, he played for the Redskins at the time and the Eagles. So he was one of the guys who first really made an impact as an Aussie playing pro gridiron, because for so many years it just didn't really happen.
Yeah, you're right. So what elements of the AFL, of Australian football, do you see that would likely be relatable or translatable to an NFL fan who hasn't experienced it before?
Well, I think it's just the atmosphere, the passion of the fans. Like, I mean, footy's unique in that way. I mean, I know we all love making fun of the fan bases, and I know but we all love footy, and it's as Brett Kirk would say. But no, I think it's just the unique atmosphere of a footy game, and I know you haven't experienced it yet. Hopefully this year, if you have a chance to finally go down under, but it might sound cliched, but the MCG, it's a shrine. It's not a stadium. You walk in and you feel the history. It's incredible to think about. My dad, who again is a Brit and obviously grew up familiar with cricket, he didn't, until I told him, he didn't make the connection that the MCG was as important to footy as it is to cricket. But getting distracted, NFL, I think NFL fans, they can relate to that. They can relate to the passion that everyone has for their club. They can relate to, the thrill of being at a grand final or being at a Super Bowl and, breaking down bawling because their team finally snapped a streak. Like, Sydney Swans, of course, famously did that in 2005, 72 years, something like that. And I mean, that element of sports is universal. And I think also just the AFL just seems so outlandish because there's no other sport like it in terms of constant handballing, constant action, big hits, speckies. Of course, everyone notices the speckies.
Right.
That's the biggest thing. Americans just, when their jaw hits the floor, they're like, wait a minute, you can climb over people.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've shown, and I don't know if you have one of these, but I have a doc somewhere in my files online on Drive that has 8 or 10 different YouTube videos at the ready to click on and and say, hey, watch this one, check this one out. So I don't know if I'm too much of a fanboy by doing that way or not. But I mean, I've shown the big hits clips to my students and the ones with the greatest top 50 marks or the best mark of the last 20 years and such. And it's especially the kids who do play football, they play gridiron football at the school. Their eyes get big like saucers when they see what these guys are capable of, and when they see the size of the ground compared to a gridiron field, they're shocked by how big it is compared to what they play on. Right.
And again, I think that shock and awe kind of translates a little bit again to the Aussie punters, because when a punter goes viral for 76 yards, who is it? It's an Aussie. 99% of the time, they've won. I think it's 5 of the last 7 Ray Guy awards in college football. For those who don't know, that's best punter in the nation, of course. And I think again, it's amazing to see that, of course, and to see the skills translate. But so many Americans don't have that reference point. Like, they've never seen an actual Aussie take a torpedo with a Sharon from back in the 80s. So I think, it's inevitably a little bit lost in translation. But again, there's that interest that's sparked, and people can go home and be like, why are Aussies so good at this one specific kick? And sooner or later, a quick Google search later, they'll probably find Footy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But unfortunately, I don't think we have nearly enough people who are that inquisitive.
Yeah,
so
I think we are kind of creatures of habit.
Yeah,
just as Americans in sports in general, it's always football, baseball, basketball, the logical ones. The ones that you're used to growing up.
Yeah.
Even. So,
and if you're an NFL fan listening to this, and again, I'm hoping to get this in front of as many different NFL fans as possible. I fell in love with this game it's been almost 7 years ago now. And Rick, you've been playing how long?
Since 2015, 2016-ish.
Okay. So yeah, just a few years longer, but you've actually been participating in it and actually spent a year playing the game in Australia, which is, was a huge jump to do that. And as you said, that was if I remember correctly, you said that was a very big jump in terms of talent level and such, and the skill level. And you really had to work, and it really helped you hone your game and improve yourself quite a bit there.
Oh, 100%. And it's inevitable. I'm certainly not the first to be a Yank who's played at, the local footy level, long tradition of a lot of great Rebos players, a lot of great USAFL players over the years. But it was a unique experience for sure. And obviously you've got to up your game, and obviously you're going to have to unlearn some bad habits, but the willingness to learn and the willingness to just put your hand up and be physical. And, because even if you're not the most skilled player, you can still be physical. You can still run. You can still give all the one percenters. And I think that's also something that that translates to NFL, because, just the intensity and the passion that everyone plays with in pro football. Like, know that for some of them, the odds are stacked against them in terms of having the Hall of Fame career, or even a career that lasts 7 or 8 years, and footy's a cruel game in the same way, in terms of, like, some people just get unlucky with injury. Some people just, don't have the work ethic to put in the hard yards. So I think, both the negative and the positive emotions of both sports really translate well, but the passion's undeniable, because these are world-class athletes. These guys are just the cream of the crop. So.
I think they're at the zenith of athletes. I think just with the running that that they're doing, and just the distances that they're covering, and just stop and go, change of directions, all the different skills that they have to incorporate in the game is something that, as we saw with the 49ers game this past week, this past week, not everybody on the team can throw a ball.
Yeah, and again, when injuries strike, they frequently strike very hard. But you want to talk about being unlucky with injuries, ladies and gentlemen, the San Francisco 49ers. That was
their quarterback room. Yeah, their quarterback room.
And especially that, the Purdy injury didn't look that bad at first, but he's going to have to do the equivalent of Tommy John surgery for football. So best wishes to him. That's a rough surgery and a rough recovery. So
he may. I don't know. They talked about 6 months. I would be shocked. I would be shocked if he played this next year, because it's usually.
They said there's I heard on the Pat McAfee show the other day, I think it was Pat McAfee, that there's typically like an experimental thing that they can do that's like 85% effective, and it can shorten the recovery. So maybe 6 months might not be unrealistic, but normally that's, it's weird to think about, but that's the same timeline as an ACL typically. So it's crazy to think about how you get hit in the elbow in the wrong place, and boom, you're in a shit situation. Pardon my French.
Hey, I spoke the same language a little while ago, so no need to So we've got this game that we both love, and I don't watch a lot of NFL anymore. I'll watch the Browns play because I guess I'm a masochist. I'll watch Ohio State play because they're kind of the local team, and I'll usually watch the Naval Academy's team play. But I don't watch a lot of. I'm not somebody who is glued to, the Sunday night game, the Monday night game, the Thursday night game, and the ones, trying to find places to watch all this stuff on the NFL Sunday Ticket. But I am watching all of the footy.
Exactly.
And I think that it fits so nicely here in the United States. If you're not a baseball fan, if you're an NFL fan, if you're a gridiron or a college football fan, footy is something that I think is just a natural progression. If you're not a baseball fan, because it fits right into it's almost like, doing like a dissection and taking that schedule out, that end of March through beginning of October schedule out, and dropping footy in there in the exact place, and it's almost a perfect fit.
Right. Yeah. It really is, and I think that was that was another thing that was convenient for me when I first started watching and playing footy. I think it was definitely it's an easy transition to kind of switch off your gridiron brain and switch on your footy brain. And thankfully, there's fantasy and Super League and Super Coach and in both sports, or whatever it's called in your sport. There's the equivalent. So I did not do fantasy football this past year, thank God. I would never have had the time for it. But I do think, and I do think there's definitely, like the summer sports calendar. Yeah, again, if you're not a fan of baseball, it's pretty dry in the northern hemisphere summer.
Right.
If you're a Yank, of course. But I think, it's definitely something that can keep your interest and give you something to explore. So I think the challenge is just, the practical stuff, like the time difference and the cost of the Watch AFL app for some people. But, for the fanatics like you and me, Craig, of course, it's all worth it.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully the AFL will get their act together, and Fox Sports here in the States will get their act together and get round one on television here. We may not get every game. But, even for somebody who's a novice, who's just, starting to check out the game, like when you first started watching and when I first started watching, we didn't jump right in and, become an international, member of our club and spend $120 on the Watch AFL app. I wouldn't recommend anybody doing that yet. But okay, maybe I would, but I would strongly suggest, if you get a chance to watch, the games on FS1, FS2, or if you happen to have Fox Soccer Plus, DVR them. And, don't, if you want to stay up and watch the game that starts at 2:00 in the morning, go for it. But, if you want to watch it at, noon the next day or whatever the following evening, and just to see what the game is all about, I would strongly encourage you to do that, because I think it's the greatest game on the planet. But it's also one that does not get marketed here very well, and this is a massive market for the game. So that was kind of where I wanted to go next. And I've argued that, if we could get 1% of the U.S. population interested in this game, that's 10% of Australia's population.
Most definitely,
roughly.
It's crazy to think about, but that's a perfect illustration. And I think, it's definitely, I think, in terms of getting Americans to stay invested in it, because, a lot of people like it for the novelty. They think, it's just this crazy Aussie thing that, silly Americans wouldn't get. It's just too complex. And it's funny because, I know the people, the rugby supporters typically are the ones who call it aerial ping pong as a jab. But I think, a lot of Americans, they think it's so chaotic at first. But, the more footy you watch, the more of a rhythm there is to it. There is a real logic in terms of, there is a real coaching style too. A lot of people think, how do you even coach this? It seems like everyone just has to improvise. But there's obviously very set structures, and even if you don't play the game and know the game from that perspective, it's I mean, the best footy teams, when Geelong are at their finest, it looks like ballet. It's just, there's a rhythm to it. There's just such, you can feel it through the crowd. You can feel the momentum building when they're really clicking. And I think that's the same thing as, watching an air raid offense, watching Pat Mahomes really hit his stride on the gridiron. And again, those are the universal moments where, even if you've never seen a footy game before, or even if you've never seen a gridiron game before, you can feel the energy. And that's something that, brings people together. And
right.
that's the camaraderie that people remember about their sports teams. And that's the thing that can, something you can hang your hat on when, when life happens and you can just get around the fans and get around a sport that everyone loves.
Well, I would argue, I would even say that it is a beautiful game. And just because, and I don't mean like, yeah, I guess there is some pageantry involved with it, but it's, there's a lot, I think in many ways, the pageantry about the game itself is much more reserved than say the NFL. Maybe proper might be, and maybe that still is kind of the influence of, the whole, being part of the realm, if you will. I think that's the right word for it. I may get some hate mail about that, but it is it's a beautiful game, and when it's played, when it's played well, I get lost in it, and it's just whether it's the men's comp, the women's comp, which again, if you're here in the US, yes, there is a women's league that's been going on now for 8 or 9 seasons now.
Close to
maybe
it.
I think maybe it's eight seasons coming up here pretty soon. Yeah. So, and it's been improving every single year. So let me ask you this:
you love seeing the ladies give it a crack. It's awesome. But yeah, and I think and I like what you're saying there. It is a beautiful game. All due respect to the late Mr. Pele, but there is something beautiful about footy, and I think one thing that's a little bit hard to describe, and I guess I kind of see it more coming from the American perspective, because being surrounded by the NFL, the NBA, MLB, all these leagues that no question they're bigger than they've ever been, but they're also as corporate as they've ever been. And I think there's a charming old school vibe to footy where the traditions matter, and people can still the grandparent fans, they can still remember the flag from the 50s or 60s,
Right.
And because it's such a uniquely Australian game, and it's such a grassroots game as well, we have that in football too, being grassroots, but it's not the same. And I think, and again, of course, we don't have a gigantic network of local footy like they do in Australia. So I think, but yeah, there's something it's hard to describe, but there's definitely a charming old school vibe to footy. And I know there's too many rule changes. I know some people might, at the risk of getting too controversial, some people might, not like a certain politically correct take that the AFL chooses to take. But footy is still such a fun game. It's such a pure game because it's all about effort. Size doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. You just have to run hard. You have to play your guts out. You have to run your guts out. You have to be there for your teammate, have his back, literally. And I reckon, again, those are all universal lessons in sports, but the bonds that you forge in footy, those are special. And I definitely have a unique vibe with my footy friends in Australia, my footy friends in LA compared to everybody else. And that's not me playing favorites. It's just, it's hard to describe unless you know the culture around footy. And it always helps when your culture is surrounded by great human beings. And I've been very lucky and blessed to be surrounded by people in LA and in Melbourne when I played there who are just quality humans, people who, they're good people. They're good community people. So I think that's something that's missing in the NFL these days. I think, if you're looking for, the charm and simplicity of a sport that's relatively untouched by some of the stuff that, like in your case, some of the stuff that causes you to walk away from baseball or watching football regularly. I think, there are some positives there that NFL fans, and it's not to say that everyone's jaded, but, there's plenty of people out there who, might not watch it as much as they used to. And I'm one of them sometimes, but I think the AFL has the ability to really hook people and keep their interest because not only is it the excitement from a Yank perspective of, learning all about a brand new sport and devouring this information just like you and I do, but I think it's also just, the unique things that make footy feel special.
Right. And it's, and again, since this episode is kind of geared towards, people who are maybe going to be coming into watching the game, one of the things is that, sports here in the United States, that to me, that relationship between the team and the fans is nothing like the relationship between the club and the supporters in Australia. I mean, I think from what I have been able to gather and from what I've seen, there's a genuine love affair that goes on between the supporters of clubs and the clubs in Australia. And there's also, from what I've been able to gather, so many more opportunities for you to actually interact with the people that are part of the club.
No question. I mean, shoot, my mate Anthony Malici, back in Melbourne, his mom Mary, shout out to her as well. She's a hardcore Dogs fan, like even more so than Frode. Sorry, Frode, you're not the biggest Bulldog supporter in the world. You'd like to think so, but I mean, Mary Malici, like every year she gets a new selfie with the Bonds and puts it on Facebook. It's crazy. Like, again, yeah, that's something you can get in the AFL that you wouldn't get in the NFL. Have guys just hang around after a win, even though they're completely exhausted, and just spend some time with the fans who make the atmosphere special.
You live in Los Angeles. I'm going to guess, yes, I know it's a big city, but I'm going to guess that there will never come a time where you're going to walk into the 7-Eleven because you needed to get a Slurpee or you needed to pick up something, and LeBron is going to be on the phone with his wife going, honey, can you pick up a gallon of milk? We're all out of it. That is never going to happen because in sport here in the U.S., the athletes, and I'm not begrudging them. I think you get every penny you possibly can, but the athletes in sport here in America, for the most part, have been priced out of the orbit that we are in.
Sure.
But in Australia, you may run into still somebody that plays on your favorite club. As I mentioned on other episodes, there's a gentleman in Adelaide who lives right near the Port Adelaide training ground, and he's gone to the same coffee shop that their senior coach Ken Hinckley's gone to for years, and it's been a situation where on a Monday, if the club has won, he's bought the senior coach's coffee, and if they've lost, the senior coach has bought him his coffee. It's just kind of this symbiotic thing that's happened for several years. So
that's
it's
incredible.
It's just cool.
It's funny because, like, I mean, well, the irony is that the population of Australia is, only it's smaller than California, I think the disconnect, like, and also just like, I mean, in America we don't have tall poppy syndrome, and I think there's more of an incentive for the Aussies to stay humble because of that, and I know it's a uniquely Aussie and Kiwi thing, kind of, but no, yeah, you're right. I mean, Buddy Franklin's not making Tom Brady money as much as he might like in an ideal world, but yeah, I think there's it does enhance the community feel of footy when and Adelaide's not a big city either, a couple million people there, so not out of the question that you might run into a footy player, or I mean, shoot, if you went to the right boarding school in Perth or Melbourne or wherever, there's a good chance a few of your classmates went on to play in the AFL. So I think it's when the whole country is 27 million, it really does feel like it's a really intimate sport in terms of those seeing those people, being in the same orb as those people.
So what are some things do you think that the AFL could do, or even AFL fans could do, in Australia to help to promote the game here? What could the AFL do here to help? Because again, they if they garner a big viewership, which they might end up then selling international memberships, there might be a Frode Jernhardt for every single club in the comp, leading to all those shortages of all the gear in their team store. But that money could get channeled into the youth leagues, in the city, the local clubs. It could help boost tourism, could help with researching player health and that type of thing. There's so many things that this could go towards, that if they were able to do it. So what do you think are some of the things that they could do to actually try to grow the game here?
Yeah, well, you already kind of touched on it, didn't you, Craig? Like with Fox Sports, the media deal. I know, with I don't even know if McLaughlin's ever going to step down at this rate. I still don't think he has officially, but but no, I know last year there was he was visiting LA, he was visiting a few other big media markets in the States, presumably to negotiate some type of mega deal. I know that was the rumor, but yeah, getting that done ASAP and providing a consistent avenue to, like you said, DVR game if you're not staying up to the wee hours, all that good stuff. So I think a media deal is huge. Definitely don't, if we want to do and don't do the Twilight Grand Final, because that screws us over in the States. But and especially, like with the Dragons, we have our Grand Final function, which is a huge fundraiser for us.
Yeah.
And it's never ideal if the game, no one's going to come to the game starting at midnight on a Friday, So it's definitely that's definitely something that, you panic a little bit when you hear that the AFL's considering it, just because, who knows? Maybe they're just doing it for the clickbait. Who knows? But it's definitely a debate that keeps popping up. And I would definitely say, if I had unlimited influence at AFL HQ, which I don't, I would definitely recommend not to pursue that. Do not pursue a Twilight Grand Final because it will screw everything up.
Okay.
So, also, I think in terms of the money, like, for whether it's for the USAFL or like trying to promote Auskick more in the States, there's some funding. There's just, there's never enough to go around. The AFL, they're still focused on growing it in the rugby states. And there's nothing wrong with that, to make the game truly Australian, like, Queensland, New South Wales. I get it. Those are fast-growing areas. Are they footy states historically? No, but they're worth the investment. And Tassie, of course, the NT, whatever other future states or territories might give it a crack. I'd love to see an NT team now that we know for sure that a Tassie team's coming. With that said, I think, there's, the AFL is focused on the AFL. And they're focused on growing the game domestically. And any international spending on the other leagues, if I'm not mistaken, they've still got to help out Fiji and PNG and Ireland and New Zealand and all those other teams that are going to be at the International Cup competing against the Rebels. They've got their own leagues, and it's been growing well in a lot of countries, as anyone who follows the World Footy group on Facebook knows. Shout out to Troy Thompson. But it's definitely... Yeah, the AFL is very inwardly focused, and that's doubly true for the footy media. When the International Cup is in Melbourne, they might get a footnote on the third page of the Herald Sun. It's not something that is prioritized in terms of international growth. And hopefully in the future, with the AFL keeps growing every year, and COVID obviously threw a monkey wrench into the works, but the attendance is getting back to where it was, and it's still exciting, even with all the rule changes. It's still exciting.
Yes, and it's still I think it's I think it's the most dynamic game out there.
Absolutely.
You have to experience it, and I'm not saying in person because I've only watched a couple games in person with the USAFL. And again, if you're here in the United States listening, we've been talking about the USAFL, and that competition is all over the United States, and there are clubs that play in. Well, there's close to 50 different clubs in the USAFL, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
right around 50. Yeah, then there are clubs in Canada, and there are clubs, all over Europe and all over Asia as well. This is a game that is being played all over the world, but it just hasn't garnered the traction yet to garner the interest of people who would probably be fans of the game if they saw it a couple of times and got a chance to really figure out what was going on.
Sure. And there's definitely truth to that. There's very much truth to that. I think, it's something where, if there's a club in your area, even as a supporter, come down and watch. Like, it's always, whether it's a tournament in USAFL or if it's just, elsewhere around the world. There's footy clubs all over the place, and the more you research it, the more you realize, wow, seeing an Aussie game go global. Or any unique game go global.
Right.
However under the radar it is, it's not making world headlines, but how cool is that? Like importing a little slice of Australia everywhere else. And I think that's unique, and that's something that should be embraced.
Let me ask you this, because I don't know where the hell this came from, but we have a huge facility here in town that has. Where did the axe throwing stuff here in the States come from? It is just taken over. It's been taken off, and we've got a place in town here about 8 blocks from my house, and I've not been there because I don't want to go hang out with my family with giving them sharp objects. But supposedly they have like 500 different beers on tap at this place.
That might not end well. Yeah.
Yeah. But it just, I mean, where did that, I don't know. I don't know if you've done any of the axe throwing stuff.
I've done it. I've done it once. It's harder than it looks. There was this little kind of winter village that they set up up near Big Bear, or kind of between Big Bear and Lake Arrowhead, which for all you non-Southern California people is high elevation. They do get snow. It's about 3 hours from LA, give or take. So there's some good skiing up there, and it's nice in the summer as well. But yeah, like, I mean, I did some axe throwing there once, and I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing. But no, if axe throwing can get big in the States, why can't footy? You're exactly right.
Yeah. No,
I have a question for you as well, Craig.
Okay, I'm not saying we combine the two things. I'm not advocating that at all.
Well, who is that? Who is that person who? I'm not, for the record, I'm not a Harry Potter mega fan by any means.
Oh, you're asking the wrong. I've never seen a Harry Potter film because I am.
Right. But there's the debate that Quidditch was directly inspired by footy, and J.K. Rowling, of course, is not Australian, but
right.
It's an eerily similar game. So it's maybe Quidditch inspired Gaelic, and then Gaelic, who knows? But I think. Okay. It's there's so many sports. I mean, we have the World Series of Poker on TV. We have bowling on TV. We put footy on TV.
Yeah, we get instead of watching footy, we get 20-year-old coverage of the World Series of Poker.
It's weird.
It's just give us something fresh. And I know you said you had a question for me, but the one thing I think that they could do, and I can't think of a better person to work on creating this, and whether it's behind the scenes or whatever the case may be, is having a weekly highlight show about the AFL that was on FS1 or FS2, where they talked about they showed highlights of the previous week's games, and they maybe previewed a couple of the games that were going to be on television here in the US, and put it on at like 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
Instead of the 20-year-old poker tournament, or the lumberjacks on bicycles, or whatever the hell they happen to have on. It's just let me be in charge for a day. But I maybe they come to you for that gig and say, hey, you want to work as part of the production team for this. I don't know.
Who knows? But I do have a question for you in terms of looking to the future, and again, tying both NFL and AFL to this. In the next decade, what is more likely? An AFL game being played for points in the States, on the West Coast, of course, because of the time, or an NFL game being played down under? Which is more likely in the next decade?
Part of me thinks that I would like to say it'd be the AFL game, because they were supposed to have been one already, because Essendon and GWS were supposed to play here back in 2020, I think.
That was
right when COVID was happening. Yeah,
we all know what happened in 2020, and it was Kevin Sheedy's brainchild. He's always been a huge supporter of spreading the game overseas. And
now there's somebody I should try to get on the show to talk about this. And you know what? Yeah. I know somebody who I think probably knows him and might be able to put me in touch.
Oh, we have like 15 mutual friends on Facebook. It's hilarious. He'll occasionally pop up in my suggested feed.
Yes. Yeah.
But no, like that's his brainchild. Obviously Essendon, GWS, the clubs he coached, being able to, obviously the logistical concern is getting a stadium and getting a good turnout for it to be financially viable, because it's freaking expensive to stage any footy game. I know they tried an Anzac game in New Zealand. Port Adelaide tried China for a few years, but that's a huge money pit that a lot of people aren't willing to go down. So they'd have to do it right with the stadium, with the capacity, and obviously getting the word out in the States so that it won't just be an entirely Aussie crowd, that Americans will rock up and be like, oh, what's this? This is actually amazing. Why don't we have it here? Mm-hmm. As for the NFL down under, I mean, it's tempting to say that could happen sooner rather than later too.
I think it could also. It's because there is because the NFL is huge in Australia.
It's getting there, yeah.
It is getting there.
I think, and yeah, again, it's tempting. I mean, we've had Mexico City, we've had London, this past year we had Germany games in the NFL. I mean, granted, they made sure that Tom Brady was playing because even everybody in Germany knows who Tom Brady is. But I think, I think there's definitely, there's good outreach by the NFL in terms of the London games sell out within the hour these days, and I think the bigger problem with bringing it to Australia, it's not that there wouldn't be a fan turnout. I know they tried college games in Sydney once or twice about 5 or 10 years ago, but then stadium issues came up in Sydney. That's the big thing. Brisbane and Sydney are the only places that would have rectangular stadiums that would have enough capacity, 50, 60K for an NFL game. And again, given that you would need it to be a sellout in order to make it viable from a dollars and cents perspective, you'd have to do it right. So,
or from an optics standpoint.
Oh, of course.
Or from optics, because you don't want the stadium to look empty when you're
no kidding.
There. Yeah.
And also, I mean, logistically, again, you'd have to make sure that you do it right. And of course, also, the players you have to have a bye week either before or after, because that travel would be a grind. I've made the nonstop flight. It's from LA to Melbourne nonstop is about 15 hours, and it is absolute slog. So that would be a big issue as well in terms of you'd have to arrange it. Again, NFL or AFL, you'd have to arrange it right before or right after a bye week just to account for the insane logistics. And it's automatically a short week. It would automatically be a short week just because, you lose a day on the way back and you gain a day going there. So, there's a lot of logistics, but it could be done. It's just a question of.
I think that I think that the NFL might find themselves wanting to possibly play maybe a preseason game there, where they have a little bit more time to fiddle around with in terms of getting the club back, getting them reestablished here, getting their body clocks back right before the season starts.
I think that's a great idea to some extent. I think the problem is that, again, speaking of both sports simultaneously, with AFL, I think you have more chance for an instant hit. It's preseason footy, but, brand new sport to these Yanks. They're going to enjoy it regardless, as opposed to, let's be honest, preseason NFL is unwatchable most of the time and will put an Aussie
Fair
audience.
Fair enough.
I think that would work better in the AFL context here in the States as opposed to vice versa.
That's probably true. That's true because especially you don't want it to be the third week of preseason where none of the starters are playing or anything like that. Yeah, or actually they usually do play a little bit in the third, but yeah, it's I don't know. I just hope that they realize that this is a somewhat of an untapped. Or maybe not untapped, but not tapped enough marketplace.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to say untapped because they did some things back in 2020 when they had Eddie McGuire doing the show on Sirius XM and they were rebroadcasting games on the Dan Patrick channel. And I don't think that continued.
I don't think it did either. But that's a creative idea. And I think speaking of guys like Dan Patrick, I mentioned Pat McAfee earlier. He's promoted footy. I'm pretty sure he has a signed Mason Cox Guernsey somewhere. He obviously McAfee's a former punter, and he's well aware of the Aussie phenomenon in punting. So I think having someone like that, given what an audience he has, having him go viral talking about footy, even if I remember correctly, his terminology wasn't always great. Still don't think he knows exactly what a mark is and how you can play on or just kick. But still, I mean, like someone like him has a huge audience, and mostly on places like YouTube or Instagram, where it can rack up views very, very quickly. So I think those are things that can be tapped into as well.
I would love to help him figure some of those things out, but I am still blocked by him on Twitter. Still don't have a clue how that happened. I still have no clue how that happened, but
figure
it did. Yeah.
But no, I think there's definitely the crossover potential in terms of, again, a media rights deal is a huge thing. Having the grand final at a time where it's better for the overseas market is definitely something that to reiterate that, I think it's really important. So.
And while I like that, I think we also have to keep in mind that when it comes to the grand final, we are not the target audience at that point in time.
Of course not.
Yes, I mean that's kind of us. That's in a way that's kind of us saying, see us, we're Americans. It should be the way we want it. And we sometimes we have to go. Yeah, you can't. Oh, I don't want to say this. You can't always get what you want. But who sang that song? Oh, is it the Stones? Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I definitely and I think also, like, in terms of the way, and I think this might become a trend. Like sports is so analytics focused these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in footy, it's in NFL, like everything is so advanced because we live in a pretty advanced time analytics wise. There's so many different things you can do to kind of get a leg up on the competition, and I think just Aussie coaches learning from American coaches and vice versa. I think I know I think you might have talked about it with me on social media before, but when Tassie was still commissioning the group to, officially give the go-ahead for a Tassie team, you had Clarkson out. Clarko was on that committee, and he traveled to the Green Bay Packers, and he was kind of looking at, like, Tassie's a small market, Green Bay is a small market. How have the Packers been able to thrive? And, of course, they have a unique ownership model. They've survived in an era that should have squished them like bugs from a market standpoint. Like the place where I went to college is the size of Green Bay, like 100,000, 110,000 people. It's by far the tiniest NFL market, and by extension, Tassie is going to be in a similar boat. But I think those are the kinds of things that, the more knowledge that can be gained back and forth from coaches in either sport, I think is massive.
Absolutely. Yeah. So before we wrap up, I did want to ask you about your footy. So when do the Dragons get started again with their training, or have you already started?
Right. Dragons are starting in a little over a month. Thankfully, we got a really good ground. We've had it booked in since the end of last year, actually. So we definitely had some issues with. Put it this way: a city the size of LA should not have so few parks, and even fewer parks that are big enough for footy. So that's been a challenge. Thankfully, we're right by LAX, so whoever's leaving or going can maybe get a nice little aerial view of practice on
there you go.
Weekday nights. But yeah, Dragons are about to get going again. I'm on the board again this year, helping out with social media and communications, which is, I did that once before, but it's good to be involved again. And I'm definitely looking forward to the season. We should have some guys coming back. Unfortunately, we are losing a couple of guys who are heading back to Australia, but there's definitely a lot of talent. There's definitely the desire to get better. We hosted nationals last year. Honestly, didn't do that well. So we're definitely motivated to have a bigger off season and get fitter as a group. And I think we're definitely, the schedule's out. I think we're definitely in a good position. We also have some exciting stuff coming up in terms of, just the branding and the social media stuff. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited to be part of it. But yeah, training's starting soon.
Good.
We know what the schedule is going to be for the most part. Western Regionals is up in Seattle this year, and we got Nationals in Florida again. So hope you can make it down. I know it's never a good time with school and all, but it does fall around Columbus Day weekend. So maybe you can try to
see if I can get a day
book
off.
a quick flight.
No, I know that I believe the Midwest regionals this year in Columbus.
Oh, really?
I think so.
They've got some great players there.
So I do play if that's the case, I do plan even if it's in Cincinnati, I do plan on going to that and spending the weekend there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And getting to see as much
we went
as I can.
You saw Cincinnati play Columbus last year,
Cincinnati,
right?
2 years ago. Cincinnati, Columbus, Nashville was there. Indianapolis was there.
Nice.
Yeah, and there was a young man that was playing for the Nashville team who now plays for the New England Patriots.
No kidding.
Yeah, who was just, I mean, he's a tight end for them.
Wow.
Named Matt, I think it's his last name is Sokol, Sokol, and he was a tight end at Michigan State, and he was about 6'6".
Wow.
And he was phenomenal.
Oh, I'm
absolutely
sure.
phenomenal. Yeah.
How crazy is that to think about? I think in terms of, transferring those skills. Like I was talking with Khalil Sample a few weeks ago when we were. I was like, hypothetically, like what NFL athletes or what NBA athletes you think, given the right training and everything else, of course, would be the most athletically suited for footy. Imagine someone like Trevor Lawrence playing center half forward, 6'6", phenomenal strength. That'd be crazy to think about. Or Kyler Murray as a Kazi Pickett type.
Right.
I think the hypotheticals are so fun to think about because again, the athleticism is, it's a different type of body structure. It's a different type of fitness, but that's the skills are transferable to some degree.
I mean, I would think that maybe some of the slot receivers would do pretty well, in the as your Tyson Stengels and your Kazi Pickett's and your Shea Boltons and that sort of thing. They would probably fill that role admirably.
Yeah. I think again, it's the hypotheticals are always fun.
Oh yeah, that is a good idea to think about that. So I mean, that's just another way to kind of translate, the skill sets from the NFL to what they see going on there. But yeah,
we can't always be Pendles and transfer from basketball to footy now, can we?
He played basketball? I didn't know about that.
I know, right?
Yeah. Now, for those of you who were listening and wondering what the hell we're talking about, he just stepped down as the captain of the Collingwood football club, and he's been playing the game now for 15, 16 years now, something like that.
Yeah.
And every game he still plays, the announcers always seem to reference his background playing basketball. It gets referenced every single game, and it's almost like, I don't drink, but it's almost like the drinking game on. Oh, hey, they said he plays basketball. Take a drink. In my case, it would be coffee, but
no, it's every time they mention it, and no, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, he played underage basketball and footy with Matthew Dellavedova, who of course played in the NBA for many years
with the Cavaliers. Yeah, and he's back in Australia. I think he's playing in the NBL now. I think he went back to Australia to play in the NBL. Yeah, yep. I tried reaching out to him to get him on the podcast and never heard back from him.
Bummer.
Oh well.
You should try Hugh Greenwood.
Okay.
He of course he played basketball here in the States for my alma mater's big rival, UNM, and every year he and I were both there. UNM beat NMSU, so his jump shot was great. And then ironically enough, he moved back to Australia initially for the NBL, and then transitioned back to footy. And then years later when I discovered footy, I'm like, wait, is that the same guy? And when he was at UNM, I knew he was Aussie, but of course I didn't know what footy was at the time. So he's another guy who pops up in my suggested friends list occasionally.
Okay. Cool.
He plays for North Melbourne now, of course.
Yeah. So if you were to, and I know you're not in the advertising aspect of what you do, but if you were to put together like an advertising tagline that Fox Sports would put on, if they would actually advertise that there were games on instead of just putting them on in the middle of the night, hoping people are going to discover them, what would your tagline be?
No, it's not rugby, because that's always the question that everyone has to answer first.
Okay.
Being a footy fan in the States.
Okay. Well,
I think, in all seriousness, I mean, I can't really That's a good homework assignment to think of a catchy hashtag that could translate to the U.S. audience, but also be like uniquely Aussie.
Well, you mentioned the rugby players referring to footy as aerial ping pong, and I think the rugby players are just jealous because they have zero vertical.
All they have are giant trapezoids.
They just have big shoulders and such. They don't have a vertical. I mean, maybe 2-3 sheets of paper underneath there is about it.
That's a good one. I think I think there's I think that there's definitely where there's a will, there's a way, and footy will eventually cross over. The smaller the world gets, it's just
that's true.
And also, on the flip side, we kind of lose the hipster street cred of, oh, I know this cool Aussie sport that no one else watches over here. But no, I think there's it's so infectious. You get people involved and you get them hooked. Again, they see the beauty of it. They see the tradition and the atmosphere of what makes it so special.
I mean, I have converted one person into a fan so far. So, I'm hoping to double that this year.
There we go. That was the vice principal at your school, right?
Yeah, he's the principal now. Yeah, he's an Essendon supporter.
Oh, poor guy.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I
didn't tell him about the draft when you converted him.
No, I didn't. But I haven't even. I don't think I've sent him that Twitter account either, because I think he should have that Twitter account in his feed coming up every day, because it's over 6,000 days now from what somebody mentioned the other day. And I'm not somebody who's going to harp on that and because I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, and the last time we won a championship, I was in diapers, and the way things are going, I may be back in diapers before.
Well, hey, I think that's another thing that the AFL and the NFL have in common is the banter, the trash talk.
Yeah,
It's so fun because I think granted, in America we don't often call each other cunts, but it's it's nonetheless a very fun vibe when you're talking smack on Facebook or in.
But that is meant with such admiration when it's used there. I think it has a different connotation here than it does there.
Oh, most definitely.
And I'm not allowed to even say that on my own podcast. I've been told I'm not allowed to say that word, so I'm not going to say that here. But I'll leave yours in because I've already marked it on my doc here to make sure I mark this one explicit, because we did, But Rick, man, I want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to come on. This has been a great chat. I love talking to you because you are one of the most passionate people about this game that I've met, and I thank you still, and I know I've thanked you before. I thank you for not telling me when you were actually literally the first person to reach out to me on Twitter when I was tossing out this idea of doing a footy podcast, and you basically said, that sounds like a great idea. That's a wonderful idea. It wasn't, okay, you dumbass, what the hell are you thinking? You didn't do that to me. So I tip my cap to you, sir, because I truly appreciate that. I needed that affirmation, I think, in that situation there. So.
Yeah, no, again, it's a small world, and I was happy to do it. I vividly remember being in Darwin in the wet season in sweltering humidity and being on Twitter and browsing through footy stuff as you do. And your name popped up and I was like, oh, what's this? And then I saw your idea, and having no idea I was the first, let alone anyone else, following you and picking up on the idea in the footy Twitterverse, for lack of a better term. But
right.
It's great that you've done this. I know you've had so many views, so many listens all over the world. Everyone appreciates the fact that there's one more person in America talking about the greatest sport on earth. And it's something where it's proactive. And the more people find out about footy, the more chances you get to expose the podcasts. And in reverse, the more people you get to tell at school, tell in your community about the greatest sport ever. So I think there's, you're just as passionate as me. Trust me.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks.
Always a pleasure, and it's great talking footy, no matter who it is, because it's such a great sport, and I can talk about it for hours.
Yep. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on again, man, and cheers to you, and all the best.
Cheers, Craig. Looking forward to the other episodes coming out, and whoever's out there and wants to give AFL a shot, you'll be glad you did.
And do me a favor, hide your car. And I'll leave it at that. I won't say anything else. Just hide your car.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb in general.
Yes. Okay, man. Have a great evening.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye. All right, Rick, thanks for taking time out of your evening to sit down. I know you had been busy. You had just moved into a new place. I appreciate your insight. You, as I've said, you've been a huge friend of the podcast. I love exchanging notes with you, messages with you about all things footy and other things as well, movie related as well. And I appreciate your help in trying to figure out how do we go about encouraging our fellow Yanks to watch more AFL, or in the case of the LA Dragons, get them to come out and try playing footy themselves. If you head over to the USAFL website, you can find the links to the, I believe, 47 clubs now. I'm not going to get into that any further, but there are now 47 clubs in the USAFL all over the United States. And if you live in a major metropolitan area, you probably have a club in your city or in a very short drive. So if you're somebody who still has a passion to go out and compete, you may want to check out playing the game as well. But if you want to watch it, well, you can certainly do that as well. And in a couple of days, I will be going through my preview episode for round one, as well as giving you my ladder predictions for 2023. And we'll discuss the games that are going to be televised here in the United States. But you can find all that information on the website afana.com, afana.com, the Australian Football Association of North America. And they do a great job reporting on the game, but they also do a fantastic job of keeping tabs on what games are going to be broadcast on either FS1, FS2, or on the Fox Soccer Plus channel, or a group of channels, I guess, technically. So again, Rick, thanks for coming on today. Ladies and gentlemen, remember that you can find everything related to my podcast over at my website, ayankonthefooty.com. I do hope you'll sign up on the mailing list. I am closing in on about 125 people on the mailing list, so when new episodes come out, you'll have it in your inbox in about 45 seconds. Right after it's released. If you enjoy the podcast, you've been listening for a while, or if you're new and it's something you think, wow, this is pretty awesome, and you want to head over to my website, you can leave a review there, or you can click on the review button at the top, and it'll take you to Apple Podcasts. You can leave a review there as well. Help trigger that the algorithm over to Apple, and let's get more people checking out the podcast. If you want to help out the show as well and keep it up and running, since I'm a one-man operation, you can also click on that Buy Me a Coffee button there if you want to, help to, defray some of the costs of running the podcast. That'd be greatly appreciated. You certainly don't have to do that, but if you do, that would be absolutely awesome. And again, don't hesitate to leave me a note. And all of my socials, you can find links for those over at my website. You can find me on Twitter at Yank_on Facebook at Yank on the Footy Podcast, or Yank on the Footy on Instagram. You can find my name, Craig Wessels, on LinkedIn and on Facebook as well if you want to connect there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, look out for one another. Check up on your friends. Make sure they're okay. Tell them you love them. Take them out for coffee. Take them out for a beer, whatever you do. If you need to talk to somebody, please check those numbers that I have in the show notes. The numbers for organizations like Beyond Blue. Please reach out to somebody if you need to speak to somebody. Don't feel as though you have to battle through something all by yourself. There are people there who will listen. And there are people there who will help. So please check on your friends. And if you need help, get that help. Now, ladies and gents, I do close out every episode the same way. So if you are new to the podcast, here comes that closing. Ladies and gentlemen, may your dribble kick never hit the post. I will catch you later. This has been episode 243 of A Yank on the Footy. Again, you can reach me at Yank_on Twitter, or to yankonthefooty@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at A Yank on the Footy and A Yank on the Footy podcast, respectively. You can find me on LinkedIn as well as on Facebook as me. I do appreciate you listening. And I do hope you'll also share the episode with your friends. If you're an American who's curious about the AFL and you have any questions, please reach out. I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can. I would maybe even love to have a roundtable discussion with Americans who are new to the AFL to talk about the game with them and get their thoughts on it. So if you're somebody who would be interested in doing that, if you've checked out the game, please reach out. I'd love to chat with you about it. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.